And hello, everyone. I'm David Chen, here today with Dan Gvozden from the Amazing Spider Talk podcast. Hello, Dan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm on a road trip right now, so if people are watching live and wondering why does Dan look like he's in a hotel room, it's because I am, not because I have the stylings of the Marriott in my
Dan,
house.
Dan is on a road trip, and he's like, you're basically on a vacation with your wife, and we had some discussion about whether you'd actually do the episode this week, but you brought your microphone, you brought all your equipment with you. That's how much Dan Gvozden cares about what we're doing here today on the YouTube channel as well as my Patreon page. Thank you so much, Dan. We really appreciate you sticking with us today.
Absolutely. It's funny. This is maybe a little bit too much of how the sausage gets made, but the last vacation I went with on my wife was where I met you, Dave Chen.
Wow.
So we're keeping the consistency here. Every
Literally,
vacation I go on
yes,
will
it's a
invite
policy.
you along with it.
It's a
Yes.
policy. So what we're doing
Yeah.
here on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Dave Chensky, that's Dave Chen SKY, is every week we are recapping the latest episode of Loki on Disney Plus. This week we will recap everything and spoil everything through season 1, episode 4, which is entitled The Nexus Event. We will not spoil anything from future weeks' episodes. So anything from like next time on, or if we're speculating using comic knowledge, we'll try to like demarcate that we're speculating using comic knowledge. So that is what we're doing here. Now, also, if you are a Patreon of mine or a patron of mine at patreon.com/Dave Chen, you get the high quality audio version of this podcast. So it's free on my YouTube channel, but if you want to listen to it from the convenience of your podcasting app, it's got to be patreon.com/Dave Chen. All right. So let's get into it, shall we? But actually, before we dive into this week's episode, let's talk about some follow-ups from last week's episode. Okay?
Sure.
Now, one of the big things that I saw in the comments from last week's episode was around Sylvie and her kind of quick turn from like, she's been built up as the ultimate badass in episodes 1 and 2, murdering innocent people left and right, like, and when she broke into the TVA, like disintegrating some folks, and then, or what is it called, pruning them, I guess is what
Yes.
they call that.
Pruning them.
And then all of a sudden, not only is she, I mean, she's still like, is motivated by the same things, but she's almost kind of like a romantic interest for Loki, and they're supposed to have this kind of buddy chemistry. And what I sensed from some of the comments was like, this was a pretty quick heel turn. Now, I think that this episode 4, the Nexus Event, actually does a lot to address that. Like, it makes her, in my opinion, like a much more sympathetic character. But I kind of wanted to just bring that up as like, yeah, that was kind of quick how she went from being potentially the villain of the season, and you see her actually murder people or mess with their minds, to now she's like someone we're supposed to be rooting for. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dan Gvozden?
I still think she's kind of a pretty shallow character. I still feel like the show is holding back a lot of details about her that makes it hard for me even to comment on that largely, because I still don't feel like I know much about her and what motivates her. We see a little bit here. If we're to get into actually some of the meat of this episode, is the opening of this episode shows like her as a young kid getting taken away, but we don't really know what caused that. And much of her life still seems kind of like a mystery, even if she seems more kind of like locked into the Loki mold here. But I still think that she's kind of largely being used as a plot device, and so it's hard for me to like largely get invested in heel turns or non-heel turns, because she seems to kind of be just a function of the script right now. Although put in a very different position by the end of the episode. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know if that was like a real answer to your question,
No,
but
it's
I don't have
it's
strong feelings one way or the other.
Yeah, it's a good answer, and I think that there were other theories I saw brought up about last week's episode that have basically been disproven this week's. I'll say, I don't think you and I were huge fans of episode 4, but what you can say is it definitely cleared some things up. It cleared some things up. It eliminated like a bunch of different theories people might have, and then it raised a bunch of other questions. Okay, so here are some of the things it cleared up. Okay, one of the speculations I saw was that that Sylvie might not actually be a Loki. She might actually be like a Frigga or something like that, which is why she's so interested in Loki's mom last week. Maybe she's not like actually Loki, but she's still Asgardian. That seems to have been definitively proven false this episode, right? Like it seems pretty clear that she is a Loki. From my perspective, you know, we see a glimpse of little Sylvie, right, in the episode, and it's. I think it is meant to imply that she is like little Loki, right? That's the sense I got.
Yeah. I'm very pleased that you and I record on these like right away before we can get really too involved in the rumor mill. Because like, first of all, one, like I'm prone to go off into speculation, but this has helped rein me in. And so far, I think a lot of my speculations have proven pretty accurate, which makes me happy.
I agree.
And also like, I see things like, oh, the whole Lamentis thing is like a dream or an enchantment.
That was another thing. Was like I saw that like, oh, they looked like they weren't going to survive it last week, right? So it's like Lamentis is an enchantment, or maybe they die, and then we start following a complete different set of Lokis, right? Like I saw that as being a theory that was brought up as well. None of that happened as far as we can tell at this point, right?
I think like, and I think this could partially be a review of episode 4 is I think this show is actually a lot simpler than we thought going into it. Like it seems to be following a pretty standard story arc. I don't think that there are going to be any like mind blowing, you know, earth shattering things in this. I guess I thought this 4th episode was fairly predictable. And maybe it's just because I've been calling some things all along and they've been coming true. But that might just be a function of me being me rather than me speculating other things that I think it's predictable. But I think the story is in the function of the story being so solid is that it's not going to pull it was all a dream and I'm waking up in the shower.
Right. I've been doing a lot of rewatching of The Sopranos recently, and one thing that the show does well is the perspective of the show is fairly omniscient. Like I'm talking about The Sopranos, right? And so people can speculate all they want about like, oh, maybe so and so was off screen and killing this other guy. You know, like people can speculate all they want, but like at the end of the day, I was reading interviews of the creator, David Chase, and he's like, if it was important, we showed it to you. Basically, that's kind of the philosophy, right? And it's true throughout the whole series, and they don't like pull like tricks on you. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with the show. Like, it's very possible we might get to the episode 6, and it's like, it was all a dream. Everything since episode 1 was a dream. You know, like, it's possible. But I agree with you that it doesn't feel like that's the case right now, and we'll see how it goes. But I think it's kind of interesting to reflect on like what rules people can set for their universes and the storytelling, and seeing how that's reflected throughout the whole show. So
for sure.
Dan, I think you're still a little bit too close to your mic. Do you mind moving just a little bit farther away? I don't want you to come in too hot. You got some hot takes. I don't want the audio to be hot too. You know what I'm saying?
That's fair.
Yeah.
Does this sound better, David?
It sounds good. Yeah. By the way, Shareable Texas in the chat is asking, still better than Falcon and the Winter Soldier? The answer is yes. Like there's no question to me that this is still better than Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And I mean, even just the opening shots of this episode, or some of the opening shots in like Lamentis, right? Like, it wasn't the opening shots, but it's like you see Lamentis again, and I'm just like, this is so cool. Like this just looks so. It looks so cool. Like it's like a sci-fi concept that people have probably imagined and illustrated at various points, but then to see it brought to life like this, I just thought the execution of the whole Lamentis destruction was just excellent all around. I really am a fan of it. Okay, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about the episode as a whole, Dan Gvozden. What did you think overall of season 1, episode 4, the Nexus Event?
Well, I think I've kind of gotten a little bit into how I felt, but I think structurally, you know, the beats have become a little bit maybe not obvious, but like I'm not as thrilled. This episode felt like a retread largely. There was a lot of like re-beating,
Yeah.
re-hitting exposition beats. I mean,
Well, because basically we found out some pretty huge. The show dropped some pretty huge knowledge bombs last week, right?
right.
And so we found out about it. Then we need to watch them explain those things we already know to other people in the show. That's kind of what this episode was, right?
Yeah. And I don't know that I wasn't dying to spend more time in the TVA. And I know we had to get back here eventually, but to spend a whole episode with these kind of like interrogation monologues again, I thought we had gotten past that
Mm-hmm.
already in the first two episodes. Like I wanted to see the impact of this Nexus event that was triggered by Sylvie, and was teased to us at the end of episode 2 that we were largely denied in episode 3.
So
And I
so
think,
on that note, let's just make sure I am
yeah,
clear on like as far as I can understand. Sylvie goes around murdering all these people in different timelines, steals a bunch of their reset charges. At the end of episode 2, sends these reset charges to like various points in time to mess up the TVA, to get them all riled up and get them freaking out. The objective of which was for her to distract them so she could sneak into the TVA.
correct.
As far as maybe some other layer of the ruse will be revealed later, but like as far as I can understand, like that is what is the objective. So at the end of episode 2, we saw like people freaking out, like, oh my gosh, like 50, like 1,000 Nexus events are happening. And then I don't think we ever see how the Nexus events are resolved. Maybe they explained it in the, like, it happened off screen or something, but like I don't know that we ever saw the result of that, other than that she broke in to try to get to the timekeepers, and then she was stopped by Loki, and they got transported to Lamentis. Like that's basically what happened. Yes, as far as you understand.
Yeah, but I think it has like a larger impact than just that moment being resolved off screen, which we had been told that any one of these Nexus events could destroy the sacred timeline. And now we had hundreds of them that weren't doing it. So like that stake is completely eliminated if they can just resolve that off screen. But this whole episode is doing that. I mean, characters are killed left and right here, and I know that they're not gone. In fact, the post-credit scenes of this completely changes the stakes on whatever, atomizing someone. And I think that the what seems to be the overall theme of like this show about free will, like these characters being told about them being variants and not distrusting the TVA, which we're going to talk about in more detail. It seems to happen in an instant, and so that makes that decision somewhat perfunctory. And overall, by the end of this episode, I felt like nearly all the stakes of the show, as they were established, were eliminated. And like, I'm sure in the next episode, they're going to up the stakes further, likely
Mm.
by doing my Kang theory, because I've got 100% track record so far. Like, they're going to up the stakes, but it's hard to reinvest at this point when you've already. It's how I feel about like the Star Wars sequel trilogy. It's
Yeah.
like, you already told us that the Empire was destroyed, and we spent all these 3 movies only to reinstate the Empire off screen. Why should we care about destroying them again? The stakes, I think, suffered irreparable damage in this episode.
I don't know that it's quite as bad as you're talking about the transition between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens, right? Like we spent 3 movies trying to destroy the Empire. We destroyed it. Oh, by the way, the Empire's not back. Something else worse is back. That's extremely similar to the Empire. It's called the First Order, and it's like I think you wrote an article at Hollywood Reporter about like how the Star Wars franchise didn't do a particularly good job of explaining kind of what the geopolitical situation was between those films, or even during the films, right? And
Yeah.
I don't think it's quite that bad, to be honest with you.
No, I mean that is the highest. Now I'm being like really blowing this up with like being hyperbolic, but like it's akin. In this world, there is only these stakes we've been told about, and nearly all of them have been eliminated by the end of this episode.
Alex Nunez, by the way, in the chat says, like regarding my comment about what happens with all those reset charges. He says, quote, "I think there was a line that the timekeepers dealt with it, ? Shrug emoji, end quote." That's basically kind of my reaction too. Maybe it was dealt with, but like, it really felt like the show was building up to this huge badass moment when she sends all these reset charges. And then it's like, wow, what is the grand plan? And the grand plan was she's going to the place that, A, we've already been for most of the series, and B, as far as I can tell, by the way, another weakness in her plan, she could have just gone there anyway. Like, it would have been so easy for her to go there because literally all that needs to happen for her to go there is for them to find her. Like, they find her, they don't nuke her right there. They bring her back so that she can stand trial at the stupid timekeeper council thingy. You know what I'm saying? Like, they don't just like necessarily just disintegrate her there. Like, they might just bring her back because they probably want to question her, whatever, like basically the same thing they did with Loki.
Yeah.
So her whole plan and all the reset charges is kind of weird. So
I appreciate how well structured and planned this show is. Like, I think especially in comparison to something like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which felt like, and we described it then as just kind of like a series of like early drafts of like plots,
Yes.
And this does not feel like that. Although I think this episode felt the closest to that. But I feel like a lot of the characters are like, they're operating like chess pieces that have to be moved in a particular way. And I think that also rendered the performances flatter in this episode. Like, everybody felt like they were just trying to like get to the next place. And I don't think there were a lot of moments, like especially Ravonna Renslayer, who to me seems like just a mustache twirling person the whole episode. And it's like, I can see right through you. And like, it renders everything you're doing and everything the actress is doing like as completely disinteresting to me. So anyway, we're getting into the broad stuff without getting into the specifics.
Yeah, so
we're
let's
starting
talk
to
about
cross streams here. Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the things that happened this episode, right? So we start with, I think, Asgard, and we see little Sylvie. Now, Sylvie had referred to like events that occurred in her life, and how like she's been kind of being hunted by the TVA for her whole life, and we kind of see the first interaction when Ravonna Renslayer was just a lowly, what is it, timekeeper, minute person, like
Minuteman, yeah.
Well, let's be politically correct then.
Okay, all right.
Minute person.
The TVA is not a very progressive place, though.
Yeah, it definitely feels stuck in the 60s. So anyway, she goes through processing, and there's some nice little touches there. Like, for instance, the pile of papers indicating everything you've ever said is much smaller than the one that Loki has. I don't know if you noticed that. So yeah, I think it's pretty clear that she's a Loki at this point because she was on Asgard. She was a kid on Asgard. But who knows?
I thought it was interesting to use the term variant for her when they arrive, from the time portals when she's a kid. They like step out of the doors and they're like, arrest that variant. And up until now, like, variants had kind of been people, we assume, that had like escaped their timeline or broken their timeline in some major way. And she just seems to be a kid that's like not set out to do that. She's like playing with toys on the steps,
Right. Like, it's kind of scary. It's kind of scary and upsetting, the idea that you could be a variant, like just not doing anything, just like kind of chilling, being yourself, and then you still could be a variant.
And it comes back, later, where Sylvie's like, "What did I do?" And I'm curious about that, like investigating, maybe the qualifications that make a variant aren't really what we think they are.
Let me put this out there, Dan. I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and it's gonna be a very thin branch that I'm standing on.
Okay.
And you can tell me what you think of it, okay? But like, I kind of started getting the sense that, right, and it's not a huge analogy, it's not a brilliant analogy or anything, but I guess I feel like one of the central metaphors of the show is that the TVA is basically like a stand-in for American law enforcement, in general. And this idea of like, you can be, just chilling, playing, reenacting Valkyrie stuff, and then like law enforcement people can like come into your life and completely like ruin everything for you. And then at the end of the day, she's like, what did I even do that like created this whole hellish existence that we've been living through together? And she's like, I don't remember, like, because like this is an unfeeling grinding machine that crushes people into a pulp. And it is a bureaucratic institution from which there is no escape. Anyway.
And with no one with any brains at the top. It's archaic in many ways. And, all the people upholding the law at one point were people that suffered maybe under the boot of the same thing that then puts them into the position of upholding the law. I see what you're getting at. I don't think it's a stretch.
Maybe. But all that said, it's important to remember Marvel is military propaganda. Okay. Moving on. So Ravonna meets with Mobius and... let's see. Okay. So we see Ravonna meet with the Timekeepers, and I was like shocked that we are actually going to see the Timekeepers, and they kind of looked, to be honest, kind of lame, like sitting on these thrones, which I think is part of the intention, because when you're imagining them, you're like, oh, they rule from these like galactic thrones in space instead of they're just kind of chilling against a wall here. And again, I think that's part of the point of the show. Like the point of the episode is like, they're not supposed to look that impressive from my perspective, right? Like I think because they're revealed to be fake at the end, they're not supposed to be that impressive. Dan, you have a rare apology you want to make.
Yeah, I do want to apologize because in episode 1, I compared the Timekeepers in this to a character from Marvel called the Living Tribunal. And these are two completely separate things. And I had not read enough comics with the Timekeepers in it. And, both of them are 3-headed gods that rule over the Marvel Universe. And I conflated the two. So I wanted to issue an apology for those of you who probably rushed out and were like, I got to read all these Living Tribunal stories. I apologize.
Yeah, you created a Nexus event in those people's lives.
I did.
Unnecessarily. Like all those people, they're like beating down the door of their comic book store to read those Living Tribunal things. And then when they got to the end, they're like, Gvozden.
I will never mistake a 3-headed demigod in the Marvel Universe ever again.
See to it that you don't.
Okay, I won't.
All right, let's talk about Ravonna Renslayer and Mobius's plotline this episode, right? Ravonna meets with Mobius, and Mobius wants to know what happened to C20. She's that woman that was interrogated / enchanted at the beginning of last week's episode, right? What happened to C20? And Ravonna says her mind got all scrambled up. She died. And Mobius is like, I don't believe you. I'm going to steal your tempad and find out the truth. So then he steals the tempad and then watches... a video of the interrogation in a rather incredible way. Like, I don't know what they call this style of video, right? But it was like, I've seen like some people put, the video game Doom on like a Game Boy or a graphing calculator or whatever. And it reminded me a lot of that. Like, we've already seen in this show, they have like amazing projection technology, but for some reason he's watching this thing on a Virtual Boy or PS Vita or whatever, you know what I'm saying? But
it's anyway, like all in ASCII type.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he watches this thing and then he realizes Ravonna is lying, and not only was she lying, she was actually at the thing that happened. Like, zoom in, enhance on her face. So then later he's apprehended and then pruned, which is pretty brutal to watch. Didn't know that Owen Wilson would be dying this early on. Or is he dead? What do you think, Dan Gvozden?
No, I don't think you get rid of all of your major characters in one episode. Although,
maybe
somewhat daring. Yeah, maybe. I suspect he's traveling to a place with a bunch of other Mobiuses. I was surprised that we didn't find out who the other assistant of hers was in this episode, because it was in the previously on, they highlight the like extra rings on the table of condensation. And he even brings up in this episode, like, say I'm your favorite agent, and we didn't get that reveal of who the other person is. Quite yet, and I think that's going to ultimately be something interesting.
By the way, free Wombat Hugs in the chat says, "Wow, Dan should be truly ashamed of himself. I've been telling all my friends about the Living Tribunal." So you're ruining lives on the podcast, Dan, is what's happening. I just want you to make that clear, okay?
And friendships too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is the last episode of the Loki recap show, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. Okay. So, anything else you want to say about the Owen Wilson stuff before we move to the Lamentis stuff?
Yeah. What do you think about this Ravonna character? Because like for me, like I imagine we're meant to see through her to some regard and know that she's like full of it. And we've been calling this for a while, but like I just kind of feel bad for Gugu Mbatha Raw. Like the character is almost like doing the same beat over and over and over again, and I'm so bored by this character just being, like I said, I'm like a mustache twirling villain. I just thought, like, what do you do in that performance?
There is a moment in the episode where Sylvie gets the nightstick or whatever the hell it's called, the baton of zapping powers. Do you know what it's called? I don't know what the weapon is called. Anyway,
time prod. I
don't know. The time prod from from Ravonna, and then Ravonna looks at her and she's like, do it, and I kind of felt like, I don't know if I know enough about Ravonna to feel like I could believe this moment where she's like, do it. You know what I mean? Like, you really, there's moments when I'm watching cinema and like, someone has a gun pointed to their head and it's like, do it, like, kill me, whatever, like, and sometimes it can be like a very powerful moment. Like the guy or the girl is like in such a terrible state that they're like, I don't care if I live or die. And that's like a profound state to be. Or there's so much pride of the person heading into the battle that when they are defeated, it's like, well, I might as well die because like I don't want to be like alive as a loser to you, right? Like, so there's many ways to do that moment right or in a way that emotionally resonates. And like that was the moment when I felt like, I don't think I'm really getting what I need out of this like character arc, because she's like, do it, and I'm like, what? Really? Would she say that? Like, would she really be in the state where she's like, tell Sylvie do? I mean, I know they have history together. I know, like, on some level, Ravonna is like embarrassed by the fact that she had like the fact that Sylvie got away at the beginning is probably very embarrassing to her, right? But it didn't matter. She overcame it, Dan Gvozden. She went on to become the top assignment giver or whatever at the TVA, despite this horrible lapse of judgment that she had. So anyway, this is my extremely long way of kind of agreeing with you. So
just a lot of it felt very arch to me, and even down to like the blocking, like people felt like they were standing somewhere waiting for their turn to get engaged with it. In a way that felt very, and this might not be a fair comparison because I don't watch a lot of these shows, but like, hopefully you'll know what I say about like CW-ish to me. Like it just felt kind of cheap. Like, okay, now these people are going to fight here and everyone's going to hang back. And now it's your turn to look into the camera and do your,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's also like, these are gods. By the way, unchained gods. What I mean by that is like, they don't have you're talking about the end scene where they got their collars off, right?
Right.
And so theoretically they have their powers, right, without the collar on. Is that? Is that right?
I don't think magic works in this dimension.
All right. But anyway, I don't need to see these gods fighting hand to hand, basically. And despite the fact that I think the hand to hand combat is not interesting in the show continues to insist on showing me Loki and Sylvie fighting hand to hand. This is like the third fight scene we've seen in the last like 2 weeks. So anyway, I agree with what you're saying about that scene. So,
okay.
All right. What else happened? So, Mobius puts Loki into time jail, and that's really interesting, right? The idea that like
even before that, we're back on Lamentis.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Where the moon is just collapsing into the planet. I think visually stunning, and it has that kind of like strange frame rate to the animation that reminds me of like a Ray Harryhausen movie. I don't know if I was the only one to pick up like to feel this way or look at it this way, but like there was something slightly off about the animation that made it feel even more otherworldly to me.
I didn't get that sense. I think maybe we just haven't seen that many those like large planetary bodies that close together on screen in general.
Okay.
But yeah. Also, Jonathan A in the chat clarifies they are free of the rewind remote thing without the collars. Still no magic though. Okay, so apologies, that's my bad. All right. So they're on Lamentis, and you think, oh, they're gonna die, they're gonna die, they're gonna die, and they don't die. And the reason for that we discover is because there's apparently a Nexus event occurring right at that moment, and then TVA shows up and kind of like we don't see it happen. We see two of those time doors open up, and then cut to next shot. Loki and Sylvie are in the TVS custody, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting like bridge in time because like I originally felt like did I miss something? Like is it your understanding that they went directly from that moment to the TVA, or are we going to find out there was some thing that happened? They went through a series of doors before getting there.
I think it was a very odd cut because I think in every other instance in the show, when the time door opens up and they go through it, we see them come out the other side in general.
Right.
In general. Like there's probably exceptions, but like in general. And so it's very odd that you see the time door open up and then you don't see them go through it. So I think it's entirely possible that they are going to play some funny. There's going to be some funny business with like where they were after the time doors opened up. So,
I mean, are we to expect that those time doors were opened by the TVA? Was that your read on it? Like,
yes,
my read was that
basically there's a Nexus event, and then they're like, well, that's where they are. We're going to go capture them. Open time doors, go snatch them, and they bring back.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. Now, what was that Nexus event? I don't think that's explained by the end of the episode. However, unlike the other dropping the reset charges all over throughout history, I think they actually are going to address it because they bring it up at least one or two other times this episode. So I think the question of what the Nexus event was will be resolved.
My guess is that it has something to do with like this burgeoning relationship between the two Lokis. Mm-hmm. Like two Lokis are not meant to fall in love with each other, or something like that.
It's like what Time Cop says. Like the same thing cannot occupy the same space. The same matter can't occupy the same space at the same time. You know, and so they were there close together and holding each other's hands, and it created some kind of Nexus event because of that. Maybe
it's a love that transcends the multiverse.
Indeed. So that's what happens with Lamentis. They go back. Then Loki's apprehended. They're split up. Loki's apprehended. They're put into two separate rooms. In one room, Loki is in this kind of time jail. And this actually was really awesome. Like the idea of like being. What was great about the Loki time jail was it wasn't even like the worst day of his life. It was just like here is a like kind of bad moment for him. And it wasn't a day. It was just like literally a sequence, like a 30-second sequence that would replay over and over again. And you could see how that could be A, incredibly torturous, and B, get him to soften up and want to confess to get out of that room. I thought this was like probably one of the most inventive and cool things about the episode, other than how Lamentis looked. I thought this part was really cool. What'd you think?
Yeah, I liked it too. I thought it was cool to see Jamie Alexander back reprising her role as Sif. You know, which is a character I think has kind of gotten a bit of short shrift and was kind of killed off screen. I imagine at the end of Ragnarok or the Infinity War Endgame stuff. So it's cool to see her here. At least I think she has died. You know, it's kind of like weird. Like, you know, I know that Valkyrie was able to escape all of that nonsense. But anyway, I thought that was cool. I liked that it's kind of actually referencing Norse mythology, which is something that they do in the comics a lot too. Loki has cut Sif's hair a number of times in the comics because it's like actually something that happened in Norse mythology. The most famous time is from Thor Annual number 11. So there's a sort of like kind of I wouldn't say this is a comics reference. This is like a Norse mythology reference. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of neat that they can take this character back to his like actual roots. Pardon the hair pun there, but
Well, that's something you and I both know a lot about, Dan. Hair.
Yes, yeah, exactly right.
So Joe Bender in the chat, by the way, brings up an episode of Black Mirror that this reminds him of. I'm not going to say the episode because it would potentially spoil it.
Right.
But there's an episode of Black Mirror where the idea is brought up of being able to make someone experience vast quantities of time in a very short period of actual time. Like you could like make someone feel like they lived 100 years in like 10 seconds, you know, and like this would be like, it sounds horrifying, let me just say, right? Like at its darkest core, it is a horrifying idea. And so you see kind of a lighthearted version of it in this episode. But yeah. Okay. Also, James Bohan says TVA willing to use torture just like the United States. Dave's analogy continues to hold up. Thank you, James Bohan.
Somewhere we've got time manipulation technology that we're only putting to use to torture people at Gitmo.
The military put out the UFO report. You know, there's going to be a time manipulation report coming out shortly, I think. So
I think you're right.
Okay, so then what else happens this episode? B-15, played by Wunmi Masaku, meets Sylvie, frees her. They go back to the Rock's cart. And then she's like, show me. And I guess they go back to the Rock's cart so they can like conceal themselves, right? Like so no one knows where they are, which I thought was kind of a cool reference to that. And then she like touches her head, and then she shows her like, hey, you were actually a person. You weren't a variant for the whole time. You had a life. You were on the show. It was on HBO Max. It's called Lovecraft Country. Remember that? No, I'm just joking. So yeah, and like turns Wunmi Masaku to her side, and I thought the actress did a great job. You know, she didn't have that much to work with, but I think she really delivered when it comes to like explaining why she would turn against her superiors at the end of the episode. So, anything else you want to say about this Sylvie B-15 plotline?
Not particularly. I mean, I think I would have liked to have seen the images that B-15 was seeing, just so I could have that connection to it and see what motivated her so strongly. You know, I imagine they're holding out on that because we also we don't. I know Mobius doesn't get the same treatment that she does, but I imagine we're holding off on visualizing Mobius's life in some way from before. You know, the scene we should probably talk about next is Mobius releasing Loki from his time jail and interrogating him, which eventually leads to the Loki spelling out to Mobius that he's a variant and his reaction. What do you think of that scene?
Yeah, it was good. And, you know, there's going to be, we'll discuss it later. Like, where do you go once you get pruned / disintegrated by the time prod / whatever? And it was kind of shocking and sad to see Owen. Like, it was kind of weird to me that they pruned Owen Wilson and not Loki at that moment, you know? 'Cause it's like, why is Owen Wilson more deserving of punishment than Loki, you know? So that was a little bit weird, but you know, the two of them together are great, and I think it would be good to see Owen Wilson's character deal with that information a little bit more. That's what I thought was going to happen, but instead,
did you buy his abandonment of the TVA?
I don't know that that's what I would describe his arc as. Like, I think he was behaving in a way that I thought was pretty logical given the circumstances. He's not like, F this play. I think he's just like, let's just play this next step out. Loki's right about this. Let's find out a little bit more. You know, I'm going to follow this path to where it leads. That's kind of what I got, the sense of what I got from Owen Wilson. Not like, let's blow this whole thing up, like, F it. Everything I believed in is a lie. It's more just like, okay, you want to save your friend, like, let's see how this plays out. That's kind of the sense I got.
I mean, I think his line where he tells Loki that Loki can be whoever he wants to be, even someone good, is kind of his way of like suggesting like, I don't believe in the idea of the sacred timeline anymore. Which is, I think, a more extreme take, but
interesting.
I think it could go either way as you describe it, but I think something more extreme has happened here for the character, and I don't know that I got there entirely which might account for why you feel like
Right.
it didn't actually get there.
Yeah. Interesting. So shall we talk about the final sequence?
Sure.
They go see the timekeepers. It's the whole thing with the timekeepers is a huge letdown, and I think it is partially intentionally so, right? It's like, oh really? Like you take an elevator down and the guys are there? Like it's not, they have less protection than like the vice president of the United States. Like, this is shameful. These people are responsible for keeping the universe on track.
Although at the same time, I just watched that 40-minute documentary on the New York Times about the insurrection, and it really does seem like you could stroll into the Senate if you wanted. So anyway, not to bring up something a little too raw, but
wow, pretty dark analogy, Dan Gvozden.
Okay, all right. They're all robots, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes,
Q is right.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway.
I mean, it was not a hard thing to predict that the timekeepers were not as they were. Honestly, you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of Davy Jones from the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, is what it reminded me. Just in terms of their like facial design and the way they talk. You know, Bill Nighy's performance is like, you have disrupted the timeline. Like it's very like, it reminded me a lot of that character. So
yeah, sure. That's pretty good. I like that. We have to keep this timekeeper's impression going.
Yes, I'll try. Joe Bender in the chat says, I needed to turn on captions to understand the timekeepers. You and me both, pal. You and me both. So, B-15 shows up and is like, I'm going to help you guys subvert the timekeepers because they stole my life. A close quarter combat fight scene ensues. And then I don't think B-15 is killed or pruned, right? I don't think we see her.
No.
She might be knocked out, but I don't think we see her kill or pruned. We see a bunch of other dudes get owned. The timekeepers turn out to be androids. Sylvie and Ravonna fight. And then Loki is about to confess his feelings for Sylvie, or can impart some kind of knowledge to her. What do you think was going to happen there, Dan Gvozden? Any sense of what was he about to say? This was like Finn's unspoken words in Rise of Skywalker. It's like, what was he? Where was he going with that?
Well, I hope he's not going to say that he's a Jedi, but Lord knows with the Disney Corporation. But no, I think he was probably going to confess his feelings for Sylvie and the implications that might have for the timeline. I don't know if I buy this whole Sylvie relationship thing, but I think that's where we were headed.
Well, I think one of the things that the show is actually doing well is, for the most part, I buy the emotional reality of Loki.
Yes.
I buy that this is a guy who's like effed up. He's made a lot of mistakes. He didn't end up where he wanted to be. And there were reasons for that he is now exploring during the course of the show. So I might not buy Sylvie's plotline. I might not buy Ravonna Renslayer's plotline, but I kind of am still buying like what Loki's emotional reality is, and that is important because the show is called Loki. So that I think the show is executing rather well. And what was he going to say? I mean, he's realizing that he has actually feelings for this woman who is him, kind of, and that's hard to say because he's like, this is new for me. But who knows what he's going to say? Who knows what he's going to say? We don't know.
I did like, on a separate note, that the timekeepers being androids is a thing, in that they set up like that they have the metal detector to detect robots. Like I don't know what that would have meant for that, but I think it's meant to be like the clue that kind of clues you. Why does this place hate robots so much? Well, because it's run by robots.
It's like the CAPTCHA that you need to fill out when you go to a website. It's like we need you to prove you're human, but it's a robot that's running the test. Anyway, by the way, speaking of androids, did you hear a line earlier when Mobius said that they've dealt with Kree, Titans, and vampires in the TVA?
Yes.
Which is, I think, the first acknowledgement that vampires exist in the MCU, right?
Yeah. there was the cross in the drawer with the Infinity Gems. So I think like this is all kind of seeding a little bit of the Blade movie that's coming up.
Yes, yes.
That's kind of exciting.
Yes, Mahershala Ali is Blade, if I'm not mistaken, right? So that's exciting.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a genuinely shocking moment when Loki gets disintegrated, as he's about to confess his feelings or tell her some important piece of information. And I thought, wow, the bold move. They killed that character off. But then in the post-credit sequence, he asks, like, am I dead? Am I in hell? Which I think is actually not a reference to human hell, but the
Norse hell.
Norse hell, right?
Which is it's one of the realms.
Yeah.
In Norse mythology and in the Marvel universe.
And they're like, you're not dead unless you come with us. At which point, we see 4 creatures dressed as Loki. So presumably like other variants of Loki, and they have the same kind of pose at the end of like Avengers, the same kind of pose, like looking at him while he's on the ground, right? So it's kind of a reference to that, I think. So what the F is going on here, Dan Gvozden? Break it down for us, please.
Well, I don't know necessarily what is going on within the narrative of this show. I mean, they seem to be alternate Lokis that are like been pruned, I imagine, and maybe they're in some kind of like pruned limbo. I'm not sure. Although it does look like they're hiding in an apocalyptic event of some kind.
Yeah.
And there's been images of apocalyptic cities in the trailers before, which some have speculated is like a post-Avengers, the original Avengers, New York City, where Loki won and New York was destroyed. We've seen images of a destroyed Avengers Tower and stuff like that, or a Stark building. So, that could be a possibility. But standing right, like you said, standing over him are 4, Loki variants. We have an older Loki who is wearing the classic Loki costume from the comics that he originated in, played by Richard E. Grant, which is really exciting. I can't wait to see that character. I hope he, if you read the original Marvel comics, Loki was kind of a little bit of an older character who was just like purely just like a devilish, mischievous character. And I could see Richard E. Grant doing that spectacularly. So I'm all for the original costume showing up, which Marvel seems to want to do in these TV shows. I think back to the WandaVision costumes. There's Kid Loki, played by Jack Veal. Recently, I would say in the past like 5 years, Loki died and was reborn as a child. And so here we're seeing like the kid wearing the exact costume from the comics for Kid Loki, and that happens in Thor issue 617. There's another character, a black Loki, that in the German credits is called Boastful Loki. And the actor I'm not aware of, but his name is, and I'm going to probably butcher this, Diobia Opare. Do you know this actor?
Mm-mm.
So I don't know. And then if you look closely, there is a crocodile wearing the Loki helm, which is interesting. It's like an animal Loki. And in the comics, there is an animal version of Thor.
Oh, by the way, Diobia Opare played Ariohota in Game of Thrones. That's probably where most people know him from.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So in the comics, there is a like well-regarded arc of Thor where Thor is transformed into a frog and thus called Throg. Or no, it's not Throg. It's Throg. Yeah. And it's a frog dressed up like Thor with a hammer with Mjolnir. And it's become a popular character that people have wanted to see show up in the Thor movies. And I think the appearance of Crocodile Loki suggests that we may be getting an appearance of Throg, whether in this series or in Thor Love and Thunder, at some point. So I would, if you're a collector and you want to buy something to get hot, I would use this as a tip off to maybe go run out and pick up some Throg issues for yourself.
Also, Joe Bender says calls him Croaky. Croaky. And, I'm not sure if he's an alligator, Dan Gvozden. Could be a crocodile. Or I'm sorry, you said crocodile, right? I think he actually might be an alligator.
Okay, well, I know one has ridges and one does not, and that will be my apology.
This is going to be of the same magnitude as your,
living
tribunal error. Like it's just you're just dropping errors left and right, Dan Gvozden.
I'm not a what is the person who is a reptile scientist? I had it in my brain at one point, but it has fled me.
Herpetologist, I think it's
herpetologist. That's what I'm looking for.
All right. So thank you for the breakdown. What is your interpretation of what actually happened at the end of this? Like that getting zapped by those sticks transports you somewhere else into some limbo, or like it seemed to me possible that he didn't get zapped, like they teleported him out of there at the last minute. Is that a possible interpretation in your opinion?
I suspect he got zapped because I don't think we're done seeing Mobius. I think that there is like disposals for variants, like a realm for disposing variants, and we might end up seeing like a Avengers Endgame-esque ending where all of the variants gather to wage war on destroying the TVA. And so we're going to see, I've been long talking about how the TVA agents are actually clones. Well, in this case, they're not clones. They're all variants. So I bet the other person that is Ravonna's favorite agent is another Mobius. And each of these people have just been the same variants plucked. And then when they're done with them, they zap them and send them to some variant disposal universe. And that's what we're seeing is like all the people that they have, disposed of.
Yeah. It's like the TVA is like lost and found, basically.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I suspect we'll see like dozens of Owen Wilsons in the next few episodes.
Or if I'm extending my analogy of this being the justice system, it's what happens to prisoners after they are released. They don't necessarily go back to normal life. They're in some kind of limbo purgatory-esque thing where they don't necessarily have all their rights.
It's parole. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, this is parole. This is parole is what I'm saying. You guys in the comments you can decide if the analogy is good or not. But that's just the vibe I'm getting. That's just the vibe I'm getting.
I suspect we'll be revisiting that next week, either in the positive or negative.
Indeed. Okay. Before we wrap up, and if there's any questions in the chat, feel free to let us know. But we just want to remind folks that if you want the high quality audio version of this podcast, go to patreon.com/Dave Chen. Check out Dan Gvozden's podcast at amazingspidertalk.com. If you want more of Dan's extremely hardcore comic book knowledge, amazingspidertalk.com is a great way to get that. Also, subscribe to this YouTube channel, won't you? At youtube.com/Dave Chensky. That's Dave Chen SKY. In addition to these recaps every week, you got my Fast 9 conversation about Justice for Han. I'm putting up my Black Widow video review soon, so look forward to that. But yeah, hit like, hit subscribe, hit that bell icon to get notifications whenever we go live. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Okay, any closing thoughts? Anything else from the chat about this episode? What do you think, Dan Gvozden? It sounds like this is probably the weakest episode so far, but it's kind of like feels like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back in general. Like we answered a bunch of questions. It opened up a bunch more questions. It's what it's like to be in the MCU.
I'm still convinced that they're going to land this really well. I just don't think it's going to be as wacky or ambitious as we initially thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've been kind of saying how this is kind of more conventional. Like, what? Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
I just think that the act structure is really kind of obvious in this. Like, I think, and I think that just comes from having a really solid, script and really solid plotting. But I think if you can follow like the themes of this, like they're playing out exactly as they should, and I've not really been surprised by where they go. Like
okay, Dan.
okay,
Okay, Dan. Fine.
yeah.
If you are so able to predict it, how is the show going to end, Dan? Be like Babe Ruth. Point to the stands. Call your shot. What is going to be the ending of this series, season 1?
Oh, well, you're really putting me on the spot here.
Well, because you've said multiple times, like, it's so easy to predict. So now I'm like, let's put your money where your mouth is, Dan Gvozden.
I mean, I don't think that Loki is making it through the show. But I mean, I think more like that the arc you can figure out, which is like Loki is learning, that his great ambition, can be satisfied in other ways. And, it's a recalibration, but like, maybe you're putting me on the spot here to demonstrate this. You're maybe proving my point incorrect, but in the moment, I'm not feeling surprised. It's like we've called all of the things that happened in this end of the second act, episodes ago.
I would argue you're probably, here's what I would say. I'd say you're probably right about Loki's emotional arc. Like, I think that's pretty clear. He was an F up, and now he's like doing better, and he's going to realize through this grand adventure that he has how to be a better human being and to become more self-actualized and to become more self-aware. Like, I think that's very clear. I still think there's a ton of questions about how that's going to happen that we don't know yet. So that's where I come down on it.
And I think if it's structured like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which I think they're saving. It's clear to me these middle episodes are like the set up for big, fantastic finale, which is like we saved all of our money for this. And the same was true with WandaVision. It's like it will become a Marvel property truly by the end, where there's big events happening.
I would argue that Falcon and Winter Soldier and WandaVision both had like extremely disappointing finales, though.
I agree. I think because they become Marvel stuff, like they become like a conventional people punching each other.
Sarah DG has brought this up in the chat, and we'll end with this question. She says, quote, "I think the mid-credits scene was a mistake. Letting us sit with the possibility that these particular variants of Mobius and Loki are gone forever for a week would have changed our experience." What do you think of that, Dan Gvozden? I kind of agree. I feel like if it had ended with Loki dying or getting zapped and then like Mobius getting zapped and we're like, oh my gosh, did they just kill off? It would have been such a badass flex for them to just be like, and that's the end of the episode. Like, I think it would have been amazing. And then I think the post-credit scene makes me like, oh, okay, it's some other thing. What do you think, Dan Gvozden?
I 100% agree with that, but I also want to say I don't really understand their strategy for the mid-credit scenes, because it seems like with all the shows that have done mid-credit scenes so before, like they save it for the last few episodes. Like I would have turned this off, but then I remembered, oh yeah, in the final 2 episodes of WandaVision, they started randomly doing post-credit scenes. So maybe I should hang around just in case they do. And then they did. And I feel like it's weird, like either be consistent or don't do it at all. I just think it's really odd.
Here's the advantage of doing it this way though, Sarah DG, is if you do it this way, I think it would feel kind of like a cheat if they ended it and Loki got zapped, and then like next episode is like, aha, he wasn't actually zapped, like he's not dead. Then I would be like, well, that was kind of lame. Like I think I appreciate them kind of being upfront with you as storytellers. So I do think it's not all bad to show what they did in mid credits this episode. So
yeah, okay,
I think that's gonna wrap us up. This has, as always, been a lot of fun. We always get over 100 people tuning into these things live, and they always leave such really thoughtful comments. I feel very blessed to be able to do this on my YouTube channel and also on my Patreon page with you, Dan Gvozden. So thanks a lot for joining me today. Safe travels through Texas, and we hope to welcome you back to your house next week to do the podcast.
I wouldn't miss it for the world or vacation with my wife, apparently. Great to talk with you, Dave.